We are very pleased to have Sourav Roychowdhury, and he's going to tell us about non-abelian T-duality of Klebanov-Tseytlin background and its Penrose limit. So take it away.
Okay. So first, I'd like to thank the organizers to give me the opportunity to talk here, to present my work here. It's my great pleasure, actually. Okay. So here is the title of my talk, the non-abelian T-dual of Klebanov-Tseytlin background and its Penrose limit. So the work has been carried out along with my advisor. His name is written here, the Tripathy in IIT Madras. Okay. So first I will talk a outline and motivation of our work, followed by the technical details. Then actually I will enter the core part of our work, and I will end up with some recent progress, recent developments, as well as our ongoing work, and finally I will conclude. Okay. So let's start. So, okay. So as we know, in general relativity, all general relativity is concerned about the various spacetimes. So there is one spacetime admit in general relativity, which is known as the plane wave spacetime. In shorthand, it's known as the PQ spacetime. Okay. But it is something special in general relativity as well as in string theory. Okay. So first, there are some interesting features but the plane wave spacetime carries. So first of all, it admits a null killing vector. So there is a killing vector which is null, and the all curvature invariant one can construct from the PQ spacetime, like starting from the Riemann or any derivative up to Riemann is actually identically vanishes. So all scalar invariant or all curvature invariant one can compute from the plane wave spacetime is identically vanishes. Now, as we know from the worldsheet formalism in string theory that all alpha prime direction actually come accompanied by the curvature invariance, and just I mentioned that all curvature invariance for the plane wave spacetime vanishes, so it provides the plane wave spacetime provides an exacting background, and that's the beauty of the plane wave spacetime as far as the string theory is concerned. So as we know, the only view. Yes.
Excuse me. I mean, if Riemann curvature vanishes everywhere, it must be flat geometry.
No. That is another. So now the question is how to examine the Riemann curvature vanishes, but it can have the curvature. It can have the geodesically singularity in terms of the. If you consider the geodesic deviation equation, it can have some singularity also.
Geodesic deviation includes Riemann curvature. So if it has a singularity, it's not Riemann curvature trivial.
Yeah.
Are you saying the all curvature invariant means what? The scalar curvature only, or Riemann curvature square only, but not the Riemann curvature itself?
R is vanishing for the plane wave.
I think he's just talking about scalar curvature. So R++, one of them should be non-zero, right? The Ricci tensor should have a component.
Yes, the Ricci is non-zero. Its small component is actually non-zero.
Exactly. So I think what Jung-hyuk was saying is basically it cannot be Riemann flat.
Yeah, it cannot be
Riemann tensor cannot vanish. Otherwise, it's flat space.
Yeah, but Riemann is not vanishing here.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Thanks. So he's just saying scalar curvature is zero.
Yeah.
I think. Okay. Good.
I will come all these things. You know, when I talk about later, I will all about the curvature. All these things I will come. Actually, yeah. Okay. Thank you for the question. Okay. So now, if you consider the string theory in the plane wave background, so means if you consider the Polyakov action, which is very starting point of the string theory, and if you consider the Polyakov action for the plane wave background, is exactly solvable. So means, and not only that, it's actually become drastically simple. So if you consider the Polyakov action in some like gauge, and if you consider the Polyakov action in the plane wave background, it's actually just give the equation of motion of massive scalarity as far as the bosonic sector is concerned. Okay. So now in the perspective of the ideal safety correspondence, one can construct the interesting string state from the gas theory by IDSFT correspondence. Okay, sorry. Okay. So now there is a precise correspondence actually here in the context of the previous geometry. Means if there is a precise correspondence between the string mode for the previous geometry and the set of operators in the boundary gas theory. Okay, so let me explain this statement more precisely. Okay, so now as I just mentioned, if you consider the closing quantization in the PPF geometry, means if you consider the PPF background and you are considering some closing propagating on the background. So now if you consider the Polyakov actions for the background with the light cone quantization, it will give, so upon quantization of the closing, it will give some certain mode. Now this mode is actually one-to-one correspondence between a set of operators. It's not actually the full gas theory, full boundary gas theory. It's actually the particular set of operators in the dual gas theory. Okay. Okay. So now, so means in the IDSFT correspondence in the context of the planar geometry or PPF correspondence is in the gravity side, you have a PPF. If you have a PPF, the closing quantization on the PPF geometry, and in the dual sector, it's actually you are restricting the dual gas theory to a certain set of operators with large arc symmetry charge and associated with the U1 global symmetry charge. Okay. This seminal work is actually carried out by the three people like with name Bernstein, Mallasena, and Nastase in 2002. Okay, and with their name, this set of operators is actually named as BMN operator. Okay. Now, after BMN came in 2002, then after the decade, people examine the plane space time, the BMN correspondence. What I told here is actually known as the BMN correspondence. So people actually examine over the decades, people actually examine the BMN pictures, BMN operators in certain type 2B compactifications with the maximal supersymmetry. So this work is actually carried out by the BMN in 2002 for the most maximally supersymmetric type 2B background, which is ADS5 S5. Then as a follow-up work, people actually explore the BMN pictures for the least supersymmetric background, which is the Klebanov-Tseytlin background, which is n equal to 1 supersymmetric. And people also explored the BMN in non-conformal background, as well as some other fractional brane backgrounds, and so forth, so on. Okay. So now recently means just 3-4 years back, people have turned on interest to investigate the BMN operators, BMN pictures in type 2A background. Now, this type 2A background is actually, we can't say it is a kind of new background, but this type 2A background is actually the T-duals of the type 2A background. This T-dual is the Abelian and the non-Abelian T-dual background. Okay. Now, as we know by famous work by the Buscher in 1990 and follow-up work by the Hassan in 1997, that how to construct the Abelian T-dual background means if your background, let's say any type 2B compactification, admits some U1 isometry, so U1 global isometry, then there are some certain rules which is actually originated by. Is there any question? Okay. 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 So now that I was saying that if your background admits some U1 isometry, then there are certain rules which is actually originated by the Buscher. So one can construct equivalent background of the seed solution. Okay. Now these are known as the Abelian T-dual background. Now not recently, actually in 2010, people actually generalize the Buscher idea for the Abelian one to generalize it to the non-Abelian isometry. Okay. So in naively, one can say that non-Abelian T-duality is actually generalization of the Abelian T-duality, where the non-Abelian group, the isometric group, is non-Abelian. So simply it's a 2. Okay. However, there are many differences of non-Abelian T. There are many actually interesting features as well as many differences if you compare the non-Abelian T-duality with its Abelian counterpart. Okay. First of all, as we know from the work by the chemic and okay, so as we know from the work by the Verlinde and the Hornet that the abelian T-duality is actually the exact symmetry of the string theory, and not only that, the abelian T-duality is a symmetry of all order of alpha prime and G. So it is a symmetry of the full string background. However, it turns out that the non-abelian T-duality is not a symmetry of the full string background. It's just a symmetry of the low energy excitation. Okay. Means if you consider the supergravity level of the full string background, so it is just a symmetry of the supergravity level. It's not a symmetry of the full string background. Okay. So now one can ask the basic question that if it is not a symmetry of the full string background, then why we will pay attention or why we will bother about the non-abelian T-duality? Okay. The best way to answer this kind of question is, so one can generate some new supersymmetric solutions as from the node 1 by applying the non-abelian T-duality. So the so far understanding is non-abelian T-duality is just a solution generating technique as far as the supergravity level is concerned. And interestingly, so if you consider like ADS fixed background, you can T-dualize it, and non-abelian T-duality, you can generate a series of solutions which is actually plays an important role to understanding the ADS 355 duality. Okay. So now the interesting part of the non-abelian T-duality is generate some new supergravity background by applying the non-abelian T-duality from the known one like ADS phi S phi or Klebanov-Tseytlin background. One can starting from that and construct the new solution. And this new solution is actually has new CFT dual, which is actually completely different from its fifth boundary CFT. Okay. So now the question what the Swansea people asked a couple of years back, that although the non-abelian T-duality doesn't provide any exact solution, it doesn't generalize to the all order is unsurprised, it's just a solution generating technique. However, this new solution, this new T-dual solution, provides any exact string background or not. Means if you consider the non-abelian T-dual solution, does it provide any plane wave background or not? Okay. And along this way, they investigate the non-abelian T-dual solutions of the ADS phi S phi, and they showed that the non-abelian T-dual of the ADS phi S phi gives some PPF solution upon taking the Penrose limit of certain algebra. Okay. Now, motivated by their work of the ADS phi S phi, in our previous work, we considered the Klebanov-Tseytlin background, which is actually least supersymmetric background, and we consider the T-dual of Klebanov-Tseytlin background, means the non-abelian T-dual. And along the same line, actually, we show that upon considering the Penrose limit in the T-dual background, one can get the plane wave solution, which provides some exact string background. Okay. Done. Okay. So now, as we know, there is some arXiv flow is going on from the Klebanov-Tseytlin fixed point, which is the ADS phi S1, and then Klebanov-Tseytlin background, which is actually in the non-conformal background. Why it is non-conformal, that I will come later. Okay, and end up with the Klebanov-Tseytlin fixed point. Okay. Not only that, this background is, you can say this background is actually towards the realistic background. Realistic background in the sense they are all n equal to 1 supersymmetric. So it's the least supersymmetric background. Okay, now Swansea people have already talked about their non-abelian T-dual compactification. Those are the type 2A supergravity solutions. And this solution is actually already available for each case like Klebanov-Tseytlin as well as Tseytlin and etc. Okay. So now in the present literature, the question we ask, as like the Klebanov-Tseytlin background, does the non-abelian T-dual of the Klebanov-Tseytlin background provide any exacting background or not? Means if we consider the plane limit for the non-abelian T-dual of Klebanov-Tseytlin background, so does it provide any PPA background or not? That actually we examine in our present research. Okay. So here is the outline of my talk. First, I will talk about the non-abelian T-duality. I won't go all the mathematical expressions and all these things, but I will mention what the interesting features of the non-abelian T-duality, and with an example. Okay. So then actually I will briefly mention about the Penrose limit, mean what is the Penrose limit And so what is the Penrose limit and how it is defined? Okay. Then I will actually enter the core part of our work. So these two sections is actually core part of our work. First, I will talk about the type 2B compactification, the original type 2B compactification and its non-abelian dual. And then actually I will investigate the Penrose limit in our T-dual solution. And then if time permits, I will actually talk about the dual field theory. Although that is not well defined, the dual field theory. We have some speculations about the dual field theory that I would like to mention if time permits. And finally, I will conclude and talk about some future directions and ongoing work. Okay. Okay. So let's start. Okay. So now the non-abelian T-duality. Okay. So that I mentioned at the very beginning that non-abelian T-duality is actually the generalization of the abelian T-duality, where the symmetric group is non-abelian. Actually, symmetric group is non-abelian, like SU2 and SU3, or any like modulo group or so forth. Okay. So just as a quick recap for the work of the Bushel for the abelian T-duality. So okay, so Bushel work tells us how to generate new solution from a known solution which admits some E1 isometry. So just as a quick recap of the Bushel rule, which is actually the 3-step recipe. So first we consider the string background which admits some E1 isometry, and we consider some sigma model actions on that isometry, and we get the global E1 isometry. So first we evolve the global isometry to the local one by introducing a gauge field and by introducing the co-derivative via the gauge field. Okay. So now we'll add in the string sigma model actions, we add the flat connections and accompanied by the Lagrangian multiplier to invoke the flat connection. So now we'll integrate out the gauge field by using the equation of motion of the gauge field, and this procedure actually will end up with the abelian T-dual sigma model, where the Lagrangian multiplier behaves as a coordinate. So at very beginning, non-abelian T-duality is actually behaves along same like if you compare with the abelian T-duality. However, there are many more differences are there. So I will come one by one. Okay. So here the gauge field for the non-abelian case, the gauge field what we introduce in order to make global isometry to the local one. Here the gauge fields are actually SU2 values. So this actually, so here is the expression of the gauge field, where T1 is actually the generator of the group up to some constant factor. Okay. However, if you remember the abelian T-duality, if you start from the if you start from the background which admits some U1 isometry, then upon dualization you will end up the background which carries same U1 isometry. So you start from the U1 isometry, end up with the U1 isometry. Not only that, the simplest way to say the abelian T-duality, if you have a circle with radius r, it goes to a new circle with radius alpha prime by r. So it's like the big circle to the small circle. However, the non-abelian T-duality is not like some SU2 to SU2 or some big sphere to small sphere. It's something not like that. But it maps from one supergravity solution to another supergravity solution. Okay. Not only that, the abelian T-duality is actually you can go to and fro. Means if you start from the C solution, applying some duality, you will end up some solution, and again if you apply the Bushel rule with the new solution, you will go back to the previous one. However, the non-abelian T-duality doesn't go to the backward side. Not because if you start from the background which admits some isometry, that non-abelian isometry, and after applying the non-abelian T-duality, actually the isometry breaks partially. So to destroy the isometry partially, what is mean by partially, that I will come in here when I talk about the example. Okay. However, this isometry is actually may be recovered with a local, with some non-local isometry with some sigma model, and this corresponds, these two sigma models means the original one and the local one is actually canonically equivalent. So it's actually in technical language, it is known as mathematical technical language, it's known as some Zenfeld double. in terms of the double field theory that I will actually talk about very end. Okay, there is another way to study the non-abelian T-duality in terms of the double field theory. Okay. Okay. So, however, just I mentioned, the non-abelian T-duality is not a symmetry of the. Yeah, so can you ask the question? So time directions. Okay, first of all, the time directions is if non-abelian T-duality is contained in the time direction, you will end up with some instanton background. Is fine. Okay. So. Okay. Okay. So now it is not a symmetry of the full string theory. It is just a symmetry for the just a symmetry of the tree level. Okay. But interestingly, what I like to say that so there is no so there is interestingly, if you consider the non-abelian T-dual of ADS 5S5 background, which gives a type 2 supergravity solution, and if you consider the M lift of the dualized solution, it's actually very close to the GM geometry, which actually plays a very important role in M theory. Okay. So now over the decades, with series of papers, actually these people, the fancy people, along with the one, the Kolgain is also here. So today he also did a numerous work. Okay. So he did actually some numerous work on this side. And if you see their literature, they actually consider the various types to be compact replications with the ADS 4, ADS 3, ADS 5, ADS 4, ADS 7, all these backgrounds, the various types to be compact replications. And in their literature, they construct the enormous number of the non-abelian T-dual solutions in their literature with the technical details, the NS sector, RS sector, how to generalize, how to construct the NS sector and RS sector with the mathematical grade details. With their literature, they constructed a various number of the solutions in their actually series of papers, more than like 30 papers or so. Okay. However, for the time being, I'm not going their details about the mathematical details, the constructions, or the how to construct the T-dual solution. However, but to complete the picture, I will talk about one example. Okay. Okay. So in order to present the example, I am considering the near horizon geometry of the D1 D5 plane system. As we know, the near horizon geometry is described by the ADS 3 T4, and the geometry of the background is given by here. Is the metric is as the ADS 3 part, S3 and T4 part. These are the disjoint parts. And the RF sector, we have only F3 plot, which is actually effectively the volume of them. Okay. Now, the presence of the S3 is actually supports a global isometry SO4, which can be readable at like SU2L, some SU2R. Okay. Now, the Swansea people is actually, so actually the Swansea people have considered this background and dualized at around SU2L. And in dual sector, there is some interesting, and they end up some interesting background as, So these are the T-dual background, the non-abelian T-dual background. And from the metric, you can see that ADS3 part and the T4 part is actually remain same, is actually behave as a spectacular part. So ADS3 goes to ADS3 and T4 goes to T4. However, the main interesting thing is the S3 is the S3 part is gives actually a non-compact direction. Apparently it looks like a non-compact direction, and there is a vibration over the S3. Okay. So now just I mentioned that non-abelian T-duality is actually destroy the isometry partially. So you can see from the it's very clear from the example that here we start from a SO4 isometry via S3, which actually SU2L and SU2R, and we are considering the realizations along SU2L, However, the SUR plus is still there, and it is reflected by the S2 metric in the dual background. Okay. So now, however, it looks like the R is a non-compact direction, but there is some interesting things happen in the background. If you just consider this the dualized path, so if you consider the small r limit like r tends to 0, so it behaves like R3. However, for the r tends to infinity limit, this background behaves as r cross S2. So actually, so non-abelian T-duality generates the background. So interestingly, we consider the S3 and we apply the non-abelian duality, and it turns out that the non-abelian T-dual background is actually interpolates between R3 and r cross S2. Okay. So not only that, if you consider the r tends to infinity limit, this background is behaves from r cross S2 that I told now. Okay. So now, if you identify the r coordinate with some periodic coordinate r equal to psi, and now if you study the abelian T-duality along fiber direction of S3, so this background will end up the same background here I am talking about. So one can say that r tends to infinity limit, that abelian one and non-abelian one is actually equivalent. But this is as far as the NS sector is concerned. The RF sector is completely different. Okay. So however, it looks like the R equal to non-compact direction. So if you identify with some R equal to psi, then you can say that abelian T-duality, non-abelian T-duality is actually some copies of abelian T-duality as far as the asymptotic limit is concerned. Okay. Okay. So yeah. So now this geometry is actually supported by the dilaton, non-zero dilaton in the NS sector, and the two form Klebanov field in the NS sector. And RF sector, we have all fluxes. All fluxes means F0, F2, F4. These all fluxes are there, and due to the presence of the F0, it is a massive type 2 supergravity background with the n equal to 1 supersymmetry. However, if we lost the supersymmetry because okay, so we have lost the supersymmetry because the dualized direction is actually overlapped with the killing spinner direction from the original radius background. So in one word, or naively one can say, if your dualized direction is overlapped with the killing spinner direction in the original geometry, you will lose the supersymmetry. Okay. Sorry, is there any question? Okay, so asymptotic limit means I am considering the r tends to infinity limit. Only that dualized direction, so S3. If you consider the r tends to infinity limit, this geometry is r cross S3. So that's why I am going as the asymptotic limit. Okay, so the sector is it will go like the r square, and this actually goes like the some factor into volume of S3, the R cube volume of S3. But you can't compare with the you can't compare with the RF sector actually. If you consider the RF sector in the abelian one and the non-abelian one, it doesn't match actually. So only NS sector is matched as far as the asymptotic limit. Okay. 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 So is there any other question? Because now actually I have talked about the non-abelian duality. So is there any question? Okay. 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 So now I will briefly mention about the Penrose limit. So Penrose limit is actually associated to every space-time metric or the line element and the choice of the null geodesic. Okay. So choice of the null geodesic. So means whenever you talk about any background means you have a metric or line element. Okay. So now so means we starting from a background means we have a metric and null geodesic, and we expand the background around the null geodesic. Means we are kind of zooming the background. So we are kind of zooming around the null geodesic. The full background we are zooming around the null geodesic. Okay. So just as a quick recall, the geodesic equation. So this is my geodesic equation where u is some affine parameter. Okay. So now I am considering the motion of a particle with very high speed, and let's say the motion is taking the motion of the particle is taking place along some isometric direction. Don't mix up this isometry with abelian or non-abelian. Don't mix up with that. I am saying just you have a U1 isometry in the background, and particle is just a particle is moving with very high speed around this isometric direction. Okay. And there is no velocity, acceleration, doesn't have any other direction. So now if we impose this condition, the particle is moving with isometric direction, there is no motion in any other direction, your geodesic equation is actually boiled down here. Okay. And if you split this expression explicitly, you will end up with this equation. So now onwards, whenever I say that geodesic equation means I am considering this equation. However, as I mentioned, the particle is moving with very high speed, so it will follow the null geodesic condition, which is given by dx equal to 0. Okay. Okay. So now actually I am entering the core part of our work. Okay. So now, as we know, the famous ADS safety correspondence introduced by Johan Malvarsona in 1997 by the stringy nature in the ADS 5S5 background to one-to-one correspondence to the ADS to the n equal to 4 supergravity theory in 4 dimensions. Okay. So now after Malvarsona introduced ADS safety correspondence, people were trying to examine the other gravity dual for 4-dimensional CFT. And next work is actually carried out by Klebanov and Witten in 1999. So next work is actually carried out by the Klebanov and Witten in 1999. So they considered the ND3 bands placing talk to each other as the conical singularity, and the background, the dual gravity background, is actually the ADS5 T11, and the T11 metric is given by here. Okay. So now one can see from the T11 metric, it admits some certain cycles in the T11 background. We have some cycles of the 3 cycles or 2 cycles. So apart from together with regular NDC band, one can consider the wrap band, which is known as also as the fractional band. So one can consider the wrap band or fractional band, which is actually wrapping those cycles. Okay. And this part is actually taken care by the Klebanov and Tseytlin in 2000, that they consider together with the n regular D3 bands, they consider m fractional D3 bands, which is actually wrapped D5 bands. Those are actually wrapped around these cycles, reversible cycles, and this gives rise actually n equal to 1 supersymmetric non-conformal SUN plus m SUN gap theory. However, the theory is no longer conformal due to presence of the fractional base. Okay. And the dual background, the gravity background, is actually presented here. So you can see from the background, this actually the background, and there is a wrap factor is present in the Minkowski space as far as the transverse Calabi-Yau part. And this wrap factor is actually, the wrap factor is contained by a logarithmic term, and you can see the background is actually, it is a singular background at r equal to r naught. So there is some singularity at r equal to r naught. So this background is the Klebanov-Tseytlin background is actually the singular background. Okay. Now, just as a quick representation, if you compare with the Klebanov-Tseytlin background with the Klebanov-Witten counterpart, here the Klebanov-Tseytlin background in n spector we have a 2 form, which is given by here, and due to the presence of the fractional D3 band, so we have a F3 contribution in R sector, as well as in the due to the presence of the regular band, we have a F5 contribution. Okay. So actually, one can the Klebanov-Tseytlin case one can consider in another way. So due to the presence of the actually the 3 cycles in the T11 case, so one can turn on a 3-form RR slot in the T11 cycles and end up with the same geometry. Okay. Now we have to fix the normalization factors, the TR, T, and K that one can fix by consider the type 2B supergravity equation motion. Then one can fix the normalization constant, normalization factor. Okay. So now it turns out that upon studying the type 2b supergravity equation of motion, it turns out that the P is actually the number of the DC branes present in the geometry. Okay. Okay. So now, if you consider the Killing vector algebra for the Klebanov-Tseytlin background, it turns out that it supports a SU2 isometry. Okay. So now the Swansea people took care about the SU2 isometry, and they consider the SU2 dualization of this Klebanov-Tseytlin background. However, the dual background is quite complicated. You can see from here. So they consider the Non-Abelian T-duality with respect to SU2 isometry of the seed background, and this is the dualized background. You can see this is a quite complicated background. However, what I want to emphasize that the Minkowski space behave as a spectacular part. So this is the Minkowski part in the T-dual solution, and the rest of the part is actually this is the part of the Calabi-Yau part, the transverse Calabi-Yau part, and DSP is actually governed by the T-dual coordinate given by here. So this is actually quite complicated background. This is the ds+3p part, which is actually governed by the sigma p hat v2 v3, where sigma p is here. Okay. And this is the full geometry, and v2 and v3 as the non-compact directions, the apparently non-compact directions that one can see. And still the metric is singular at r equal to half tilde. This is actually the signature of the singularity from the original background. Okay. So however, you can see okay. So this background is actually admit the non-abelian T-dual background admit actually two form is the non-zero two form and the diaton in the NS vector, and as like the ADS-PSP before, here also RS vector is actually we have all classes like F0, F2, and F4. So this is also is a massive type 2A supergravity solution. Okay. Okay. So just I mentioned this actually due to the presence of the F0 plus. So this is a massive type 2A supergravity solution. But interestingly, this dual solution conical singularity in the T-dual solutions. Okay, I'm not actually sure about that. Sorry, actually, but conical singularity is still present or not. But yeah, it's not actually conical singularity. But if you there is some hidden the bold singularity is there. But you can remove the bold singularity by fixing the range of the coordinates. So if you consider the V2 equal to V3 equal to constant in the dual solution, so if you the second case is actually there is a conical singularity, but actually in T-dual sector we have a bold singularity. So, but that can be removable if you just fix the range of the coordinates. So if you set the V2 equal to V3 equal to 0 in the T-dual solution, you have a bold singularity. But that can be removable by setting the coordinate of the psi from 0 to 2 pi, rather 0 to 4 pi. This original background psi is the fiber direction, it is 0 to 4 pi, but you can, which actually write some bold singularity in the T-dual solution, but you can remove the bold singularity by fixing range of the psi coordinate from 0 to 2 pi. Okay, it's fine. Okay. Thanks. Yes. Okay. Okay. So now just I mentioned that type 2A supergravity. So this background actually solves type 2A supergravity solution which preserve the n equal to 1 supersymmetry. So here there is no breaking of the supersymmetry in the T-dual case because the dualized direction is actually independent of the Klingspinner direction. So here supersymmetry is preserved in the T-dual direction. Okay. However, if you examine the T-dual metric, it turns out that we have a two isometric direction, which is psi direction and pi1 direction. and this and along the psi1 psi direction and phi1 direction, these are the metric components along the psi and phi1 direction. So now what we study in our literature, we consider the motion of a particle with very high speed along psi direction as well as phi1 direction. We will consider the motion separately as well as the motion in a combined direction. Okay. So first we consider the motion along psi direction, means the particle is moving along psi direction. Now by imposing the geodesic condition means that I showed earlier that del mu g psi equal to 0. However, it turns out that this geodesic condition leads to some singular values. So if you impose the g psi equal to 0, it turns out that some r equal to r tilde, which is actually the r equal to r tilde, and v2 equal to 0. This actually is actually still the g psi component. Okay. So since the g psi component vanishes, so we won't consider motion along psi direction. However, by imposing the same geodesic condition so the motion along psi direction doesn't make sense in the means we can't proceed further due to the null geodesic condition, because it doesn't give any message about the null geodesic condition. Okay. However, so we left that psi direction and we consider the phi1 direction, and again by imposing the geodesic condition, we get here in this case we get some non-singular values like θ1 equal to pi by 2 and v2 equal to v3 equal to 0. These are the only non-singular values. Apart from that, there are some other values also, but these are only the non-singular values. Okay. Now, apart from geodesic condition, we have to also fix the null geodesic condition. In order to do so, first what we did in our literature, we consider some r equal to constant apart from r tilde and 0, because these two are the singular points, and we expand the background metric, means T-dual metric, along some exercise of the coordinate domain quasi space, and we consider the expansion of the background metric along some x is equal to 0, r equal to constant, and v2 and v3 equal to 0. However, it turns out that this doesn't lead to any PPF geometry, and this actually is fine in the sense if you consider the Penrose limit, it tells that null geodesic lead to PPF geometry, but it doesn't mean that all null geodesic will give rise to the PPF geometry. There are only certain null geodesic which leads to PPF geometry. Okay. So now we left in this direction. So what we consider? We consider the equation of a motion. We consider the motion in a plane. Means the motion is the equation of the motion of a motion in the plane. Means that now the particle has some non-zero angular momentum, and we consider some r phi1 plane and expand around the null geodesic, which is given by xi is equal to 0 and θ1 equal to pi by 2, v2 v3 equal to 0 that we got from here. And we propose the expansion with as follows by subsequently taking the L tends to infinity limit. Okay. With that together, we actually parameterize the geodesic by the u, some kind of Lightstone coordinate, and we parameterize the geodesic by the following fashion, and we take the L tends to infinity limit. However, the next job is to work out the coefficients, the C1 to C6. Now, by imposing the null geodesic condition, is actually fixes the three parts C1, C2, and C1, C2, and C4. So these three can be fixed by imposing the null geodesic condition. And okay, so now one can argue that this coefficient is actually the singular coefficient, that r equal to r tilde and r equal to 0. This is actually the signature of the singularity from the original background, because the original background is actually singular due to the presence of the log factor. The original background is actually singular at r equal to 0 or r equal to r tilde. So this actually singularity are hidden in the coefficient of the C1, C2, C1, C2, and C4. So actually the planar background is actually the singular background, and this singularity is actually the signature of the original singularity. Okay. However, by parameterize in this fashion and subsequently take L tends to infinity limit, it turns out that in background we have some order of some diverging term, which is order of L term, but one can kill the order of L term by in order to kill the order of L term in the resultant background, it turns out that C3 and C5, they are not independent. However, they are actually related by the following expression. Okay. So now, in order to fix the other coefficient like C6, we impose the usual normalization constant term, which is actually 2 du dv. This actually fixes the C6 coefficient in this fashion. Okay. Now, at the end of the day, by imposing the this expansion and take the L to infinity limit and removing the order of L diverging term that I showed in previous slide, that we end up with this background, and this is actually the Penrose background. You can see that UV are the usual light-cone coordinates, and these are the transverse coordinates, y1, y2, y3, wz, v2 psi, and v3. These are the transverse coordinates, and there is actually singularity is playing here, that r equal to 0 and r equal to r tilde. There is some singularity is playing here, and it turns out that this background is actually supported by 2 form and the dilaton in NS sector, and only F2 and F4 are present in the RS sector. So at Penrose limit, so this is the Penrose limit, and Penrose limit is actually F0 goes as. Okay. 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 So however, the metric we got here is actually not in the Brickman form, but as we know that it is actually in, when we talk about the Penrose limit and the PQA background, it is easy to consider in the Brickman form, because if you consider the background in the Brickman metric in the Brickman form, the only non-zero Ricci is RUU. So our next step is to transform this background in the Brickman form. In order to do so, what we did, we consider, so this is our background in this form, which is not in the Brickman form. So in order to transform it in a Brickman form, we consider a coordinate transformation along the transverse direction as well as one light-cone direction given by this expression, and then our this background is actually turns out this background, and this is actually the Brickman form, where Fi is known as the Brickman norm. Now it can be easily seen from this expression if you consider the waveform. So waveforms means some u equal to constant. So this term will go away, this term will go away. So only the metric will effectively come Ri. So means the waveforms of the waveforms, it means waveforms are just plane. So that's why it's actually named as the plane fronted ray. Now the Fi is known as the Brickman mass, and this is the expression of the Fi. And in our metric, what I present in the previous slide, so this actually the take form in our case. So this is the PQA metric in the Brickman form. Apparently, it looks as a non-singular background. However, the singularity is actually present in the Brickman mass. Okay. So now, as like we represent the metric in the Brickman form, now we do the same business for the background fields as well as the NS sector as well as the RS sector. And these are the background fields in the NS sector, and this is the dilaton at the Penrose limit, and this is the 3-form NSNS flux at the Penrose limit. However, the expression is quite complicated. So one thing, just the thing which I want to emphasize, that if you examine the flux, the NSNS flux, you can see that if the term has a leg, the flux has a leg along the u direction. This makes sure the flux is a null flux. And this also holds for the RS sector, and these are the expression. These are the expression of the flux at Penrose limit at RS sector. Here also you can see this has a leg along u direction, and F0 is equal to 0 that I actually mentioned earlier, and the rest of them like F2, rest of them means F2 and F4 have a leg along u direction. So this makes sure this actually fluxes a null flux, and we know from the construction of the block of the Penrose limit at Penrose limit, all the forms will be null forms. Okay. So yeah, so that means that all background fluxes are the null fluxes, and we actually in our paper we actually investigate the Bianchi identities as well as the gauge field equations for the type 2A supergravity in our PQA case, and it turns out that they are satisfied. They are indeed satisfied as all type 2A equation of motion and the gauge field equations. Means our solution is our PQA solution is actually the solutions of type 2A supergravity. However, this still one thing is missing, how to fix either C3 or C5 coefficient. In order to do so, we recall the Einstein equation. Okay. So here is the type 2a, this is the Einstein equation. These are actually two equations. These are known as the Einstein equations for the type 2a supergravity. And if you consider the second equation that I mentioned at very earlier, that r equal to 0 for the P2F case, and we have just I mentioned that all factors are the null factors, so h square equal to 0, and we explicitly check these two terms for the dilaton, and these two actually separately give. So this actually equation holds trivial. This is actually trivially true for P2F case. However, so it doesn't help to fix the undetermined coefficient C3 and C5. However, so this equation doesn't help to get the coefficient. So in order to make information about the undetermined coefficient, we consider the Ricci equation, and this is the Ricci equation, and that's actually what the very beginning at UU made, that only non-zero component of R mu nu is only R u, and this it is actually fixed the undetermined coefficient in the following way. Okay. So this actually is trivially satisfied we are trivially satisfied apart from only UU component, and for the RUU component. So this is the Einstein equations for the RUU component, and you can R in terms of the Brickman representation, RU is actually the trace of the du square part, and this is the RU part in for our U8. And if you explicitly compute the h square UU for our plot, it involves the undefined coefficient C5. So Einstein equation for the UU component is actually fixes the C5 the undetermined C5 coefficient. Okay. Okay. So how much time I have?
Sorry, yeah. Okay, so I was just about to remind you actually. So it's about 5 minutes, right?
Okay, okay. So I will just yeah. So 5-7 minutes I can finish it.
Yeah, that's fine. 7 minutes is good. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks. Okay. So now actually I more or less present the gravity part. So now actually I will talk about the dual field theory part. However, the dual field theory is not actually quite understandable for the non-abelian T-dual case due to the non-compact issues, and as well as the background is not actually the symmetry of the full string background, is only the symmetry at the low energy excitation. So all this reason actually behind says about the non-abelian T-duality. So just there are some actually ongoing construction made actually work by the Swansea people in 2013. So actually I will briefly mention about their work for the dual field theory for the dual field theory for the T-dual background. Okay. So dual field theory for the original background, the Klebanov's case, is actually the non-conformal n equal to supersymmetric n plus m is to n gauge theory with large n and m. So it describes the n regular D3 band and m fractional D3 band means the RAP D5 band placed at the control singularity. Okay. So for the non-abelian geometry, actually the dual field theory is actually based on the study the existence of the domain wall configuration. Means we will study what is the domain wall in the original theory and what can be identified the domain wall in the T-dual theory. So in original Klebanov's background, the domain wall can form as a D5 band by extending some R12 directions, which is actually part of the Minkowski direction in the original spacetime, and wrap around the three compact directions, which direction is actually considered for the T-dualization. Okay. So now one can consider the bounded field actions in the wall volume of the D5 band and give rise some corresponding effective tension. So one can actually do the same difference in the T-dual geometry. So the non-abelian T-duality is actually performed the SU2 isometry. So now in the case as like the RAP D5 band in the original case, this actually gives some D2 band in the T-dual geometry, which is extending along some R12 directions of the dualization. Now along the same line, one can consider the wall volume of the bounded field actions in the wall volume of the D2 band, and which is actually end up some effective tension. So it turns out that these two effective tension of before dualization and after dualization is matched up to some constant size. Okay. So now one can study the holographic central check and entangled entropy by the formalism introduced by Roychowdhury. One can actually work out the holographic central check in the T-dual as well as the original background. However, it actually matches up to some RG independent coefficient. So these two description means studying the bond and field action as well as the RC formalism. It doesn't give any new message about the non-abelian T-dual background. Okay. However, it turns out that if you consider the gauge coupling analysis by integrating the P2, integrate the Chaperone field in the original as well as the T-dual sector by considering the gauge coupling analysis, it turns out that this gauge coupling actually behaves mysteriously, like logarithmic to the power 3/2. Because in original Klebanov-Tseytlin case, it just behaves the log, but here actually we have some mysterious behavior like log to the power 3/2. So one can say this field theory for the non-abelian one is not a conventional field theory; it's quite some different field theory, or maybe the field theory is not live in a 4-dimensional space, maybe some high-dimensional field theory. Okay. So now the Swansea people is actually studies the various Maxwell and Phys charts for the various planes in the sense in the original background we have D3 and D5, and the dual background we have D6 and D8. So, considering various cycles in original as a T-dual geometry, one can calculate the Maxwell and Phys charts. Now, if you compare the charges before the dualization, means if you compare the charges D3, D5 in the original solution with the D6, D8 in the T-dual solution, it turns out that upon dualization, D5 goes to D8 and D6 actually, and D3 actually gives two D6 things in the T-dual geometry. Okay. So now actually those people, the Swansea people actually showed. So there is actually cyber duality present in the T-dual geometry also. So here actually the cyber duality means the cyber duality in terms of the geometric form. So what is actually the geometric picture of the cyber duality? So in original solution, we have a D3 plane and the two forms. So one can do a large gauge transformation on the NSNS2 form, and then actually the phase charge induced in the D3 plane. It can be shown that same charge, but in terms of the Maxwell charge, can be induced if you do a radial change in the R coordinate. If you do the change in R coordinate, and this same amount of charge, but it is a Maxwell charge, is actually induced in the D6 plane. So this is known as the geometric picture of cyber duality. Okay. So now in their paper, they showed that the similar phenomenon is observed in the T-dual geometry. However, in the T-dual, in original case, the role actually played by the D3 plane, but in the T-dual case, actually the instead of D3, we have a D6 plane. Okay. And if the same phenomenon is observed, here also we can induce a gauge transformation, and this actually gauge transformation, and this is here also that this is plane charge can change. Okay. So now the speculation one can make. So like in original case, the T-dual geometry is actually undergoes a cascade of cyber dualities, much more as the same way as the gauge theory corresponding to the original geometry. Okay. However, as I told that actually D3 plane gives to two D6 planes in the T-dual theory. So by applying the cyber duality in the original theory, if the change of so if we change by applying the cyber duality in original theory, if the m units, if the charge of the D3 plane charged by m units in the dual field theory, it will change by 2 m units. However, this is still in their description, still one thing missing. What is the Q-bar in the non-abelian T-dual background? Because what is the first one in the dual Q-bar, and how to compute the what is the gauge group along the Q-bar, and how the multipliers behave along the Q-bar is totally missing. Okay. So now for the PPA background, as I mentioned, the PPA is actually okay. So PPA is actually the dual field theory for the PPA background is actually the particular set of operators. But before that, the first thing we have to say, we have to study the dual field theory for the non-abelian T-dual background itself. Okay. So now one can study that as like for the T-dual case, one can consider that this is D8 and D8 Maxwell and Phys charge at the PPF limit. But due to the lack of cycle, it turns out that you can't define, it vanishes actually, it can't define the Maxwell and Phys charge. Okay. So now, there is no Phys charges present at the PPF limit. So the speculation what we made, actually there is no longer cascading presence at the PPF limit because there is no B2. So we can say that the theory dual to the PPF geometry corresponding to the endpoint of the cascade means there is no more cascading. So actually, what we can say that PPF actually sits at the endpoint of the cascade. This is actually in the conformation. However, in our literature, the two main things are missing. This to identify the BMN operators in the dual gauge theory. First of all, the dual gauge theory itself is not well understood itself. So now what we have to do is actually the two steps. If we want to address this issue, we have to go two steps. One is first we have to study the details. First, we have to identify the gauge theory for the non-abelian T-dual background itself. And then we have to consider, then we have to look the BMN operators, which is actually the one-to-one correspondence of the string mode in the string mode for the PPF geometry in our case. Okay. And the next thing is the correlators of the BMN operators, which actually we couldn't identify in our case. These are the two actually main things. As a conclusion, we didn't I couldn't identify. Okay. So now actually I'm in very end. So we in our present literature we consider the non-abelian T-dual of Klebanov-Tseytlin background with respect to SU2 isometry, and this non-abelian T-duality actually provides some new supergravity solution, but it is not a symmetry of the full string background. It's only applicable at the lower energy excitation in supergravity limit. Now we consider various null geodesics and obtain the Penrose limit. However, this is actually the null geodesic which carries angular momentum leads to PPF geometry. Okay. So that's the population what we made. There is no longer cascading is present at the PPF geometry. So Kleba theory is actually dual to the PPF geometry. It's actually endpoint of the cascade. Means the BMN operator is actually lives at the endpoint of the cascade. However, the further investigation is still required to identify the precise identification of the BMN sector and the mapping. So with the holographic mapping means the string modes to the observables in the physical side. Okay. So just as a future direction, we would like to explore the PPF geometries in the non-abelian T-dual of Klebanov-Tseytlin background, as well as a coset geometry. There's a famous work by Yogin in the coset geometry case, the non-abelian T-duality in coset geometry case that we are trying to explore. That is where those coset geometries admit some PPF limit or not. Okay, as well as we have a deformed supergravity background, like the eta lambda deformation. So these deformations plays an important role in order to understand the ADS safety correspondence. And we are trying to explore this thing also. And we are also trying to explore in the present context. In our actually ongoing work, we are trying to explore the background with by the ADS 3 factors. So what we do actually, there are recent paper by this paper. They talk about actually non-abelian T-dual of ADS 3S3 with some Calabi out twofold, which is actually generalized to the Calabi out twofold. And they consider actually the non-abelian T-duality along the S3, which actually end up with some acid type supergravity background with defects to T-dual. Now the question which me and my collaborator is asking, that is there any PPF geometry advanced by those non-abelian T-dual compactifications, is admit or not? Okay. And there's another thing we are trying to explore, that after the holographic central charge actually introduced by the Roychowdhury plays an important role in order to understand the gravity sector as well as the field theory sector. Now, if you consider the PPF geometry, all coordinates are non-conform. So, however, one can calculate by applying the Roychowdhury formalism, by putting some hard cutoff, you can calculate some central charge for the PPF background itself. But the thing what we would like to ask that does these hard cutoffs make any physical significance in the field theory side. But this is actually quite we actually during this we are just starting this we are thinking along this line, but sorry. No, okay. So okay, so dual safety means first of all the PPO background doesn't give any new CFT, new safety. That the PPO means we have a BMM sector in the dual safety. So compute entangled entropy means you could compute entangled entropy. Okay, so entangled entropy gives in the original case it gives some like you can calculate holographic center charge and entangled entropy in the gravity side, and it can be matched with the so in the dual sector it can be matched with the entropy with the Q1 in the gas theory side. So now that is actually quite understandable and that's fine. However, so if you see the formalism of the Roychowdhury, so there is some compatriations, and so result is finite as far as the gravity sector is concerned. So if you do the same business in the PPO geometry side, like if you have a like PPO geometry, but here the all coordinates are the non-compact. So if you consider the if you do the operation introduced by the Roychowdhury, but you will end up by putting some hard cutoff, you will get some expression. You get some expression which is actually depend on the hard cutoff. Now the question what we are asking in the dual sector, we have a BMN sector. This hard cutoff doesn't make any new message in the BMN sector or in the field theory. We are not saying that we will get some new CFT or new dual safety. That we are not trying to say, but we are trying to say we have some dual CFT and we have some BMN sector which is actually dual to the this is kind of, you can say naively is dual to the PPO background. However, so what we are trying to say that this hard cutoff make any message in the BMN sector or not. That we are trying to explore. Is it fine?
Yeah, I think you've pretty answered some of these questions, Sourav, right?
Okay, so yeah, so that
maybe a good time to finish formally, and then we can see if anyone's got a question.
Yeah. So actually, I mean, so these are actually the key references of our work, and these actually the second and third references. Actually, is a quite good literature to study the non-abelian duality, and this actually in this literature, if you let's go the non-abelian T-duality for the PPH, the non-abelian T-duality of various Phys and the field theory dual. These are the paper of them. So thanks for the attention, and I stop here.
Okay, so thank you very much. So thanks for the talk. Do we have any questions or comments? Somideep, did you have anything you wanted to ask? Anything that was unclear? Jung-hyuk? Jung-hyuk has left, has he? Right. Yeah. So Sourav, I think a lot of this stuff has got very technical, right?
Yeah.
Like this stuff is basically where, you know, okay, the PP wave stuff I think could have been done a number of years ago. And now everything has been kind of gone into, it's all gone into ODD and then different U-duality groups. And this is all like, if you talk to Dan Thompson, or Juho Sakatani, or who else is working on this? Fall Kassler. It's anyway. It's got very formal, much more formal than I think this level. And it absorbs in a whole load of integrability stuff as well. Yeah, I was just wondering if you were interested in those directions, or.
Okay.
Have you thought about them, or?
So okay, so actually in the DFT level, we are actually there is another way to study the non-abelian duality in the DFT level, but in terms of the ODD representation. But actually in another work with some other collaborator, I am Okay, so now that I mentioned, as we talk about the DFT, so as I mentioned, that there is some the non-abelian T-duality is actually not a symmetry of the full alpha prime expansion. But it turns out that if you consider the ODD formalism, if you study the non-abelian T-duality in ODD formalism, there is a recent paper by Horner and Wolf, I forgot the just I think last year. They showed there is a problem if you beyond alpha prime cube. So yeah, so there is an obstruction about the alpha prime cube. You can't go beyond that. Now the question one can obviously ask, then the non-abelian T-duality doesn't go beyond the alpha prime cube or not? Or maybe it goes beyond the alpha prime cube, but the ODD formalism doesn't help beyond the alpha prime cube.
Right, and then connected to this, you've got like if you do non-abelian T-duality with respect to non-semi-simple groups, you don't end up in usual supergravity. You end up in this extension, right? And that's also not clear if it makes any sense beyond beyond the same order, right?
Yeah. Then the question I can obviously ask, so is it like then we have to stop like alpha prime cube or alpha prime square order? Or maybe the formalism what we have developed so far, like the DFT ODD formalism, doesn't go beyond the alpha prime. That doesn't go beyond the, let's say, alpha prime cube or alpha prime cube.
Who wrote this paper on the alpha cube? Was it Linus Wolf or was it?
I will send you if you want it. I will send you the paper.
Okay, send it to. Yeah, I mean, I remember. I know Olaf Holm is also interested in this stuff, right?
Yeah. So there is another interesting thing we are actually trying to explore in the different work. So there is some work by the Kangun and also in the double copy relation.
Kangun's also interested in this stuff as well. That's a good point.
Yeah. So the double field theory in terms of the hep-th supergravity.
Yep.
So we are trying to explore in the other work, but actually the calculation is much more. There is some issue I remember in the Kangun thing in the supergravity level. There is actually a problem about gauge fixing issues in that.
Right. So this is what I feel in some sense, right? So basically where this thing is going is either it's going very technical, right? Which means very hard calculations.
Yeah.
Or it's being absorbed and rewritten in some sort of very fancy math.
Yeah, but somehow actually you can bypass or you can manage this gauge fixing issue if you consider the DFT in hep-th level.
Okay.
That actually have explored, but there are some other issues also. In order to actually rescue this thing, we have caught in some other problems. So we are hopefully we have done. Maybe our paper will come by Jan or February end. So maybe there is some interesting things will be there in terms of the DFT. Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay, if you can send me the reference, just email it to me. Which paper you had in mind? The alpha cube.
So I will knock you within 1 hour or so. Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
So actually I have someone. Actually, I would like to ask you one thing.
Yeah, we may as well just finish. So basically, everybody can leave now, and then you can ask me the question, right? So we're more or less finished. So thank you, Sourav, for questions and comments and the talk as well. Okay, good. So we're all done. Yeah. Okay. So you wanted to ask something?
Yeah. So I just want to ask about this last issue that the holographic central charge thing. So holographic central charge you can compute by Roychowdhury formalism in any supergravity background or in the D-brane background. So, but the Penrose limits, all these things, forget about Penrose limits. If you're coordinates is not compact. So then you can compute by introducing some hard cutoff. But does it make sense at the gravity picture in the gauge picture or in the gauge theory perspective?
That's not. I think that's a question I would find difficult to answer. Yeah. Okay, maybe send me an email about it. Let me think about it for a bit. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, Sourav, thank you very much for the talk. Okay. And if you're interested in cosmology, you can hit me up and I can tell you where you should be going, okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
See you.